The Riverside Ballroom had been booked solid for 6 months, but I'd made an exception for what I thought was a genuine family milestone celebration. The reservation was under Martinez's 50th anniversary, 85 guests, and the event coordinator had mentioned it was a golden anniversary celebration that had been planned for over a year. What I hadn't realized was that the Martinez family was my family. I'd been reviewing the evening's events from my office overlooking the main ballroom when I noticed something familiar about the guest of honor. The man standing at the head table raising a toast to 50 years of marriage was my father. My father who hadn't spoken to me in 3 years. My father who had made it clear that his disappointment of a daughter was no longer welcome at family gatherings. My father who was celebrating his anniversary at the event venue I'd owned for the past 4 years. I'd purchased the Riverside Ballroom during the pandemic when the previous owners were facing bankruptcy. The $8.2 million acquisition had been part of my larger strategy to build a hospitality portfolio, and it had proven to be an excellent investment. The venue now generated over $2.3 million annually and had become one of the city's premier event locations. What my family didn't know was that their failed daughter had quietly built a $67 million business empire over the past decade. While they saw me as the family black sheep who'd wasted her potential, I'd been systematically acquiring distressed properties, renovating them, and creating a network of profitable hospitality businesses. The estrangement had started 5 years ago when I'd refused to lend my brother Carlos $50,000 for what turned out to be his third failed restaurant venture. The family had rallied around him, painting me as selfish and unsupportive. When I tried to explain that enabling his poor business decisions wasn't helping him, they'd accused me of being jealous of his entrepreneurial spirit. The final break had come 3 years ago at my cousin Maria's wedding, when Dad had publicly announced that he was tired of making excuses for a daughter who couldn't even afford to help family. I'd left that night and hadn't attended a family event since. Now, watching through my office window as my family celebrated without me at my own venue, I felt a familiar mix of sadness and irony. They'd found the money for an elegant anniversary party at one of the city's most expensive venues, but they'd spent years telling me I needed to be more responsible with money. I was debating whether to simply let the evening proceed without incident when my event coordinator, Jessica, knocked on my office door. "Ms. Martinez, we have a situation in the ballroom." "What kind of situation?" "There's a woman sitting alone at table 12. The other guests are, well, they're being quite cruel to her. Making comments about her appearance, her job, things like that. She looks upset." My stomach dropped. "What kind of comments?" "One man said something about her being too poor to dress properly for family events. Another woman mentioned that she doesn't contribute anything to the family. It's making other guests uncomfortable." I looked through the window and spotted table 12 in the back corner. A woman in a simple black dress sat alone, surrounded by empty chairs. Even from my office I could see she was trying to remain composed while voices around her grew louder and more critical. It took me a moment to recognize her. Elena, my youngest cousin. She'd always been quiet, working as a teacher while the rest of the family pursued what they considered more prestigious careers. Apparently, she'd become their new target for disappointment. "How long has this been going on?" I asked Jessica. "About 20 minutes. It started when the man at the head table, I think he's the father of the bride and groom." "Groom. Golden anniversary. Right." He stood up and made some comments about family members who don't live up to expectations and people who embarrass the family name. Everyone started looking at the woman at table 12, and the comments escalated from there. I felt a familiar anger building in my chest. The same pattern I'd experienced now being directed at Elena. "Jessica, I need you to do something for me. Go to the head table and ask if there are any issues with the service or the venue that need my attention." "Your attention specifically?" "Tell them the venue owner needs to address any problems personally." "Should I mention that you're?" "Just say the owner wants to ensure all guests are comfortable." 10 minutes later, I watched from my office as Jessica approached the head table. I saw her speak briefly with my father, who looked surprised by the inquiry. She gestured toward table 12, and I could see him shake his head dismissively, probably claiming there were no problems. But Jessica persisted, explaining that the venue owner insisted on personally addressing any guest concerns. After a brief conversation, I saw my father reluctantly stand up and follow her toward table 12. That was my cue. I took the elevator down to the main floor and entered the ballroom just as Jessica was leading my father across the room. The ambient noise of conversation and celebration continued, but I could sense the undercurrent of tension surrounding Elena's table. As I approached, I could hear the tail end of a conversation that made my blood boil. "Simply can't keep accommodating family members who don't meet our standards," my father was saying to Jessica. "This is a milestone celebration, and we can't have people here who might embarrass us in front of our friends." Elena sat silently, her hands folded in her lap, looking like she wanted to disappear. "Dad," I heard my brother Carlos add, "maybe it's time to be honest about expectations. Not everyone in this family is going to be successful, and we shouldn't have to pretend otherwise at important events." My Aunt Rosa nodded in agreement. "It's not fair to the family members who have worked hard to achieve something. Why should we have to include people who bring down the tone?" I stepped into their field of vision. "Excuse me," I said calmly, "I'm the venue owner. I understand there's a problem with my establishment." The conversation stopped abruptly. My father looked at me with confusion, not immediately recognizing me in my professional attire. "There's no problem with the venue," he said carefully. "We're just having a family discussion." "I see. And this family discussion involves excluding one of your guests from the celebration." "That's a private family matter," Carlos began. "Actually, it becomes a venue matter when it affects the comfort and safety of all our guests," I interrupted. "We have a strict policy against harassment of any kind." My father's eyes narrowed as recognition began to dawn. "Wait a minute. You look familiar." "Do I?" I kept my voice professionally neutral. Elena looked up at me for the first time and I could see tears in her eyes. She clearly had no idea who I was, but she seemed grateful that someone was finally intervening on her behalf. "What exactly is the nature of this family discussion?" I continued. "Look," Aunt Rosa stepped forward, "we're trying to handle a delicate situation. This is a high-class event and we have certain standards." "What standards would those be?" "Well, a dress code, social expectations, the ability to contribute appropriately to family occasions." "I see. And this young woman has failed to meet these standards. How exactly?" Carlos gestured dismissively toward Elena. "She's a teacher. She works at a public school. She can't afford to participate in family events at this level, and frankly, it's awkward for everyone when she tries." "It's not personal," my father added, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It's just that family celebrations should be for family members who have achieved something meaningful." "And teaching children isn't meaningful?" "Of course it is, but let's be realistic about income levels and social compatibility." "I'm sorry," I interrupted, my professional composure beginning to crack. "But did you just suggest that someone's value to your family is determined by their income level?" "That's not what we're saying," Aunt Rosa began. "That's exactly what you're saying. You're telling me that you've excluded this woman from your family celebration because she doesn't make enough money to meet your social standards." My father stepped closer, studying my face more carefully. "Who are you exactly? And why are you inserting yourself into a private family matter?" "I'm the owner of this establishment, and I'm responsible for ensuring that all guests are treated with dignity and respect on my property." "Your property?" Carlos laughed. "Come on. You're probably just a manager or something." I pulled out my business card and handed it to my father. "Martinez Hospitality Group, LLC. I own this venue, along with 6 others in the metropolitan area." My father stared at the card, then at me, then back at the card. "Martinez," he said slowly. "Your last name is Martinez?" "Yes." "And you own this place?" "Among others." The recognition hit him like a physical blow. His face went white as he realized he was standing in front of his daughter, the daughter he'd publicly disowned for being a financial failure at the venue she owned. "Sophia," he whispered. "Hello, Dad." The word "Dad" rippled through the nearby tables like an electric shock. Family members who had been engaged in their own conversations suddenly turned to stare. The ambient party noise seemed to decrease as more people became aware of the drama unfolding. "Sophia, how are you own this place?" "I own this place. I've owned it for 4 years." Carlos stepped forward, his face flushed with confusion and embarrassment. "That's impossible. You work some dead-end office job. You couldn't even lend me money for my restaurant." I work as the CEO of a hospitality company that I built from the ground up. And I didn't lend you money because your business plan was fundamentally flawed, not because I couldn't afford to. But you live in that small apartment, you drive that old car. I choose to live modestly. It's called financial responsibility. Aunt Rosa was staring at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Sophia, you've been successful? This whole time. Very successful. My company's portfolio is worth approximately $67 million. The number hit the group like a bomb. I could see family members at nearby tables straining to hear the conversation. 67 million? My father repeated faintly. Yes. This venue alone generates over 2 million annually. But we thought, you never said. You never asked. You assumed I was a failure because I didn't live extravagantly or boast about my achievements. Elena was watching this exchange with wide eyes, clearly realizing that the family outcast had turned out to be more successful than anyone had imagined. Sophia, Carlos said desperately, if we had known, you would have treated me differently? That's exactly the problem. But families should support each other. Should they? Because 3 years ago at Maria's wedding, you told everyone that I was too selfish to help family. You said I was an embarrassment who couldn't even afford to contribute to family events. My father winced at the memory. Sophia, I was angry about the loan situation. You were angry because I refused to enable Carlos's poor financial decisions. And instead of respecting my judgment, you decided I was the problem. We made mistakes. You made choices. You chose to judge me based on your assumptions about my financial status. You chose to exclude me from family events because you thought I wasn't successful enough to belong. I turned to Elena, who was still sitting quietly at her isolated table. Elena, right? You're Roberto's daughter. She nodded, looking uncertain. What do you teach? 3rd grade, she said quietly. That's wonderful. Some of my most meaningful memories are from 3rd grade. My teacher, Mrs. Patterson, made me feel like I could accomplish anything. Elena smiled for the first time that evening. Elena, I continued, I want you to know that the behavior you've experienced tonight is not acceptable in my venue. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their career or income level. I turned back to my family. As the owner of this establishment, I have a decision to make. I can either allow this celebration to continue under the current circumstances, or I can ask you to leave. Sophia, please, my father began. Here are my conditions. Elena is welcome to join any table she chooses, and she will be treated with the same respect as every other family member. The derogatory comments about her career, her income, and her contribution to the family stop immediately. Of course, absolutely, Aunt Rosa said quickly. And, I continued, I want a sincere public apology to Elena for the treatment she's received tonight. My father looked around the ballroom, realizing that dozens of family members and friends were now watching the drama unfold. Sophia, couldn't we discuss this privately? Elena was humiliated publicly. The apology will be public. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Finally, my father stepped forward and addressed Elena directly. Elena, I owe you a sincere apology. What happened tonight was wrong. You are a valued member of this family, and your career as a teacher is something we should all respect and support. Elena nodded graciously, though I could see she was still processing the sudden reversal in her treatment. Carlos followed reluctantly. Elena, I'm sorry for the things I said. Teaching is important work and I was out of line. One by one, the family members at nearby tables offered their own apologies. The atmosphere in the room had completely shifted, with everyone suddenly very aware that the family dynamic had been fundamentally altered. Thank you, I said. Now, Elena, would you like to join the head table for the rest of the celebration? Elena looked surprised. I couldn't. Of course you can. There's plenty of room and you deserve to be part of the celebration. As Elena gathered her things and moved to the head table, I prepared to make my own exit. But my father caught my arm. Sophia, please don't leave. Stay for the rest of the party. We have so much to talk about. Do we? Yes. I want to understand everything. Your business, your success, why you kept it secret from us. I didn't keep it secret, Dad. I just didn't advertise it. There's a difference. But why? Why didn't you tell us you were successful? Because I wanted to know who my family really was. I wanted to see how you'd treat me without the influence of my money. And what did you learn? I looked around the ballroom at the family members who were now eager to reconnect, at Elena who was finally being welcomed at the head table, at the celebration that had been transformed by a revelation of hidden success. I learned that respect shouldn't be conditional on wealth. I learned that family love shouldn't depend on professional achievement. And I learned that some people only value you for what you can do for them. Sophia, we love you. Do you love me or do you love my portfolio? He didn't have an immediate answer. Dad, here's what I want you to understand. For the past 3 years, you've had a daughter who owned multiple successful businesses, who could have helped with family financial problems, who could have provided job opportunities and business advice. But you never knew that because you decided I wasn't worth your time or respect. We can fix this. Can we? Because right now you're interested in reconciliation because you learned I'm wealthy. If I were still the failure you thought I was, would you be asking me to stay? The question hung in the air between us. I need to think about that, he said finally. I appreciate your honesty. I started to leave, but Elena approached me before I reached the exit. Sophia, thank you for standing up for me, for changing the situation, for everything. Elena, can I give you some advice? Please. Don't let anyone convince you that your worth is determined by your salary. Teaching is one of the most important professions in the world. And anyone who doesn't recognize that isn't someone whose opinion should matter to you. Do you really mean that? Absolutely. In fact, if you're ever interested in expanding your career options, my company is always looking for people with strong educational backgrounds. We run training programs for hospitality staff, and we could use someone with your expertise in curriculum development. Really? Really? Here's my card. Call me next week if you'd like to discuss it. As I finally left the ballroom, I could hear the celebration resuming behind me, but with a notably different energy. The cruel exclusion had been replaced by awkward inclusion, and Elena was now surrounded by family members eager to make up for their earlier behavior. But I knew the real test would come later, when the shock wore off and people had time to process what they'd learned. Over the following weeks, my phone rang constantly. Family members who hadn't contacted me in years were suddenly eager to reconnect. The conversations followed a predictable pattern. Expressions of amazement about my success, apologies for past treatment, and subtle or not so subtle requests for loans, investments, or business opportunities. Carlos called 5 times in 3 days, each time with a new, amazing business opportunity that just needed some initial funding. Aunt Rosa wanted to discuss a real estate investment. My cousin Miguel thought I might be interested in backing his tech startup. The most persistent contact came from my father himself. He called daily, sent letters, and even showed up at my corporate office twice, insisting that we needed to rebuild our relationship. But the conversation that meant the most came from Elena. Sophia, I wanted to thank you again for what you did at the anniversary party. You don't need to thank me, Elena. I did what anyone should do when they see someone being treated unfairly. I also wanted to let you know that I'm interested in that job opportunity you mentioned. That's wonderful. Can you come in for an interview next week? Yes, but I have to ask you something first. Of course. If I work for your company, will that change how you see me? Will I become just another family member trying to benefit from your success? The question was so perceptive it took me by surprise. Elena, you asked to interview based on your qualifications, not on your family connection. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. And if I'm not qualified for the position, then we'll find another way for you to get the experience and training you need. But Elena, you're already qualified for the most important part of the job, treating people with dignity and respect. Elena did interview for the position and she was indeed qualified. She joined my company as our Director of Training and Development, where she's been instrumental in creating programs that focus on both professional excellence and human dignity. As for the rest of my family, the relationships have evolved in different ways. Some, like Elena, have proven their character through consistent actions rather than words. Others have shown that their interest in me remains primarily financial. My father and I have had several long conversations about respect, assumptions, and the true meaning of family success. He's acknowledged his mistakes and has made genuine efforts to change his perspective on wealth and worth. But the most important change has been in how I see myself and my obligations to family. I've learned that love and respect can't be bought with money, and they can't be earned through financial success alone. I still own the Riverside Ballroom and I still host family events there occasionally. But now they're smaller gatherings focused on people who value each other for reasons that have nothing to do with bank accounts or business portfolios. The venue has become profitable beyond my initial projections, partly because of its reputation for treating all guests with dignity regardless of their perceived social status. Word spread about the inclusive hospitality approach, and we've attracted clients who specifically want venues that prioritize respect over prestige. Sometimes when I'm in my office overlooking the ballroom, I think about that anniversary party and the moment when everything changed. Not when my family learned about my wealth, but when they learned about the consequences of judging people based on assumptions. Because the real lesson wasn't about hidden success or financial revelations. It was about the difference between conditional and unconditional love, and the price we pay when we confuse the two. The venue is still booked solid, the family relationships that matter have been rebuilt on stronger foundations, and Elena has become not just a valued employee but a genuine friend who reminds me daily that success isn't measured in dollars. But most importantly, I never again have to wonder whether my family loves me for who I am or for what I can provide. Because now I know the answer and I've surrounded myself only with the people who give the right one.